Reading Romeo and Juliet is a common milestone for many high schoolers, so of course I wasn't surprised when we had to read and analyze it in English class, but this time with a twist. We were told to compare and contrast the original Romeo and Juliet with a very popular adaptation, High School Musical. Just kidding, of course it was West Side Story. Now I'm going to emphasize the very subtle but key differences between the characters in Romeo and Juliet and West Side Story. Before we get started, I have to say that it's hard to give traits to the two main characters. In most Romeo and Juliet adaptations, the love interests are typically blank slates for the viewer to project themselves into the experience, some of the first Bella Swans. So Romeo and Juliet in both stories don't have a lot of personality besides being totally in love. Our class has also been using the 2021 adaptation of West Side Story, so a few things have changed, but the main message and ideas are still there. With that out of the way, let's begin. We'll start with the male main characters, Romeo and Tony. For similarities, they're both idealistic. They think of the best possible outcome, but don't see the realistic things that might happen. They're both totally love drunk. For differences, Tony just got out of jail, and he doesn't have a big, rich, and powerful family. He works at Docks with Valentina, which I believe he lives there under the shop. We'll talk more about his actions later too, and how that pinpoints the exact differences. But let's move on to the female main characters, Juliet and Maria. For similarities, they are both coming of age, but people treat them like they're still young girls. Also, they're both determined and go after what they want. What's different is learning that their love is a part of the rival group. Juliet really hates the fact that Romeo is from the other group, the Montagues. But Maria knows other people think it's wrong to see Tony, but continues to fall in love with him anyway because she doesn't see it as wrong. There are also a lot of side characters, but we'll focus on two now and two later. First, there's Romeo's best friend, Mercutio, and Tony's best friend, Riff. They're both spontaneous, bold, and loud-mouthed. But while Mercutio does it out of playfulness, Riff is like this because he has a tragic past and is all bitter. Riff is never portrayed as a morally good person, but Mercutio has good intentions. Next we have Tybalt and Bernardo. For starters, they both want to protect their family member, Juliet and Maria. But an important difference is that Bernardo is a little more like Lord Capulet, because there are no parent figures in West Side Story. For example, Bernardo is the one who initiates the relationship between Chino and Maria, but in Romeo and Juliet, that is done by Lord Capulet. Straying from the characters for a bit, we need to talk about one of the most important scenes that involves a lot of characters, the brawl. They have similar concepts and outcomes, but it plays out differently in Romeo and Juliet and West Side Story. Romeo doesn't want to fight Tybalt. It's very one-sided. Tony also tries to stay out of it and talk through it, but ultimately gets into the fight. Tony stops because of his past in jail, and he's not going to almost kill someone again. And this starts the fight between Mercutio/Riff and Tybalt/Bernardo. As for Mercutio, he feels like if Romeo won't fight, then he will. This is different from Riff, because his intention to fight was only activated after Tony walks away. I cannot be laying like that. You know that thing that, girls do in movies? To go back to the characters, we have Paris and Chino. Paris is egotistical, but he has fairly good intentions. He is more ignorant of the actual situation and not necessarily malicious. In West Side Story, however, Chino is more mild and humble, but he manipulates the situation when he tries to get revenge after Tony kills Bernardo. Anita is a special case because she takes on two characters, Juliet's nurse and Lady Capulet. She is like Katie Lapulette? What the fuck? She is like Lady Capulet when she confronts Maria about her secret love, but we see her with the nurse's traits when she accepts Maria's love for Tony. A final important plot point is when the plan in Romeo and Juliet takes up the entire Act 4, while in West Side Story, finding out that Maria died happens quickly. At first, Anita was going to tell Tony about Chino wanting to kill him, but after being assaulted by Tony's friends, she decided not to tell Tony. She didn't want to be on Tony's side because her loyalty lies with Maria. As you can see, there are subtle differences between the characters in these two stories. The reason the differences matter is because it helps adapt the story into a modern retelling. If the only thing you changed was the setting to make the adaptation, there would be plot holes and problems throughout the story, but changing the characters makes the adaptation more cohesive.